All right. Well, hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in on week 2 on our race and faith series on Black women. If you missed week 1, we have that actually. We recorded it for you, and that is on our YouTube page, and so you can check that out. We also took a little 5-minute clip from one of the stories LaWanda was sharing, which we titled Tolerated, Not Celebrated, which I thought was maybe the most powerful moment of our conversation last week. And so you can also use that clip to watch that or share it with friends. But yeah, feel free if you're kind of joining us. This is your first time with us. This is week 2. So my name's David Pfizer. I'm a pastor at the Well, and we have 3 lovely Black women from the Well leading us in this conversation on race and faith. And so we have LaWanda Townsend. LaWanda, why don't you just say hi?
Hello.
We have Tamekia Jackson, LaWanda's little sister.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm
then,
the tall one.
Tamekia led if you tuned into our service, she was our service leader this morning. And then our wonderful children's ministry director, Jennifer Boegner. Jennifer, how are you?
Good. Thanks, David.
Awesome. So these are our ladies. Amanda Ripley joined us last week, but she had to work this Sunday. She might join us next week, but she might also have a kid. So you just never know. But hey, we want to get started. First off, just to kind of catch us up, last week we talked about just what is it like to be a Black woman in America, and the ladies shared. And the reason why we wanted to focus in, just do a race and faith series on Black women is real quickly, I've been really influenced by this verse in Luke chapter 6. Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom," right? So when he says poor, he's not just talking about materially poor, but most like the spiritually, materially, and or like those who are marginalized, right? So those who are citizens of the kingdom, right, who represent the kingdom, who can speak for the kingdom, are those oftentimes most on the margins. And so when we look at that in our society, in our culture, I think you can make a pretty strong case of historically the group of people that have been at the bottom, at the margins, have been Black women, right? And so they get to see our culture from the bottom and really get to see, all right, what's good about the culture, but then also they can speak a lot of truth and be very prophetic about the things about our culture that are not about the kingdom. And so we wanted to do a series listening to them, listening to their perspectives, listening to their convictions. And so we just have a few ground rules. If you're tuning in with us, we're really glad that you're here. If you could just kind of keep your Zoom on mute. And we just want to have the ladies engage with one another. And we just want to take time just to be intentional on listening to them. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, feel free to write them in the chat. And then we're going to spend, next week we're going to do racism in the church. And then our last week, we're just going to have a hodgepodge of Q&A. So if there's questions that you're dying to ask, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can email me at david.pfizer@thewellsilverspring.org. And so that's how you can do questions. But then lastly, another ground rule is, especially today, I think we're going to be saying some hard things. I mean, we're tackling like white supremacy, white privilege, colorism, so pretty controversial topics. And so if my guess is some of the things we're going to be talking about, you might get angry with, you might question, you might be confused. But instead of just kind of wanting to kind of push back on that, I just would really encourage you all to sit with what the ladies are sharing, to pray about it, read about it. And if you actually, need someone to process some of these things with, I actually would love to help process that with you. So I just want to give the ladies space to feel the freedom to really share the convictions of what God has put on their heart. So those are the ground rules. And then, so that's it. So I'm really excited for week 2. So this week, we're going to be talking about yeah, white supremacy, white privilege, and colorism. But before we begin, we didn't get to this question last time, but I just want to have the ladies share with, why are you doing this? What are your hopes for our time together today and in the next couple weeks? What do you really want our church, friends of the church, people who might just be watching this for the first time? What would your hope be for them during this time together? Jennifer, why don't you start us off, and then ladies, feel free to chime in.
All right. So I just have a couple. The first is that my hope is that people that watch this would see that Black people are not all the same, that we have different upbringings, different experiences, different values and temperaments. And just like any other race, you can't group us all into one. And with that, for us to be able to see Black people as individuals in some ways. So instead of saying, oh, just like we wouldn't say, oh, white people are violent, because we see lots of white people committing different types of crimes, we see, oh, this white person who has committed this crime is violent. And then to do that same thing with the Black community as well, so that would help get rid of some of the stereotypes that Black people are violent, they're aggressive, they're this, that, and the other, which then disadvantages them, not just with the police, but in a lot of different ways. So I think if we were able to just have that basic understanding that all Black people are not the same would help with that. Second, I would say, for my hope is that people to see that though we've come a long way as far as like blatantly racist laws and policies and things like that go, that see that racist ideologies are still so deeply embedded in our society, but not just in our society at large, in our own hearts and in our own minds. And so that we would see, especially as Christians, that we're more sinful than we want to admit. So be willing to just take a deep dive and see what in my heart is not pleasing to God as it comes to how I see people that are different than me, that our eyes would be further open, that we would be convicted of different ideologies that we have that are that really disadvantage people of color, and then be willing, by God's loving kindness and grace to you, be willing to turn from that, not just to cry and shed tears, which is appropriate and good and right, but then also be willing to do the necessary work of turning from some of the sinful things that God might reveal in our hearts, and to turn to God's just the ways that he calls us to see and to love and to care for people regardless of whether or not they are like us or not. So I think those are my two main hopes for our time together over these next couple weeks.
That's great.
So I would say that my hope is that people listen and with an open heart and an open mind, and that there's growth. And my deepest hope is that God is glorified in this, and that the things that he wants spoken, the truths that he wants revealed, is what gets down into people's spirits, into their hearts, and into their minds.
I would agree with both what Jennifer said and what LaWanda said, just about just listening, and I think being willing to be uncomfortable. I think a lot of times we run away from the things that make us uncomfortable, and that really shows up in hearing or dealing with stories that are different from what we are used to or what we're comfortable with. And so I think just being willing to sit in that discomfort and see what can be brought out of that.
All right. Those are pretty good hopes. Pretty good hopes. Well, hopefully God will use this in any way to help us, I think, just further reflect him and reflect his kingdom. But that being said, it's time. Let's get into some heavy stuff. So we wanted to talk about white privilege. But before we begin about white privilege, I think we have to be honest with how white privilege came about. And so I would make the case that white privilege is really rooted in white supremacy, right? And so what is, first off, white supremacy? So I'll try to quickly define this. I think one of the things that's been really confusing about these kind of racial conversations that we've been having is I think a lot of definitions have been evolving or changing, at least in public discourse, right? So if George Floyd happened and then you're like, gosh, I really want to like get involved in racial justice and understand these conversations and work to build a better America, right? If you were to first hear that word like white supremacy, you would kind of think of, you know, the KKK, you would think of the alt-right, you would think of Charlottesville, and you would say, you know, a regular middle-class white person, someone like myself, you're like, I'm not white supremacist, right? Like, I don't believe in white supremacy. That's crazy, right? And so that's kind of the traditional term, but I think that term, that white supremacy, at least in public discourse and in scholarship, it's kind of evolved to not just like the KKK, the alt-right, but really it's this kind of ideology, how I would define it as white culture is supreme, right? That white culture, one theologian calls it, it's salvific, right? So if we were to talk about what is the most beautiful art, right? It would be what, like, you know, white Anglo-Saxon art. Like, what's the best type of music? It's white music. What's the best way to talk, right? What are manners? Well, it's how white people express as manners, right? So it's thinking about every area of like music, art, job, style, home, how you raise your kids, in the church, right? It's how you preach a sermon, what type of worship music you have, to even in our institutions, right? Not just cultural, but in kind of creating laws, institutions that benefit, that kind of elevate white people over other people, right? So white supremacy, it's this whole kind of really system that really elevates white people and white culture, and then kind of devalues people who aren't white, but especially devalues and discriminates against Black people, right? And so that's white supremacy, right? So white supremacy created slavery, white supremacy created Jim Crow, right? If white supremacy created mass incarceration, or maybe not created, or at least definitely influenced, right? And so white supremacy created all these kind of systems and discriminatory policies and practices, which then resulted in what we would call white privilege, okay? So here I am, I'm David Pfizer, I'm 35, I'm born into America. I've never owned slaves. I don't think I voted for any type of Jim Crow policies, right? But really what a lot of people would say, and what I would make the case for, is that I have white privilege. And so what is white privilege? I'm taking this from a pastor out of Jonathan Lehman. So he's associated with 9 Marks. I think he's the pastor of like First Baptist Cheverly. But he has in the Gospel Coalition, it's an article, I'll throw this on the chat screen. It's a wonderful article, but it's called More Than Mere Equality, Identity Politics, White Privilege, and Gospel Peace. And so this is what he says when he gets to white privilege. He says, white privilege refers to the structural injustices affixed to ethnicity and skin color. So it highlights how, by virtue of my skin color, you know, white people have social and material advantages. So he talks about how I, right, as a white man, am less likely to be aborted, right? I'm less likely to be born into poverty. I'm more likely to have 2 parents. I'm more likely to attend good schools. I'm more likely to graduate high school, get into college, right? I have these advantages. Like when I walk into the store, as last week, people aren't going to stare at me and think I'm going to steal things, right? So that's a layer of white privilege. But then there's also another layer where he talks about, here I go. Sorry, I missed it. He talks about that we possess specific advantages by virtue of systemic and historical patterns of discrimination and justice, right? So as a white person, I have advantages based on the injustices that my forefathers have created, that my grandfather created, right? In a great video, we don't have time to get into like the history of it, but Phil Vischer, the guy who created Veggie Tales, did a 17-minute video kind of talking about the racial injustices that have happened that have kind of produced these kind of inequalities in America, right? And so, you know, as a white person, white privileges, I have material advantages, but then also I'm benefiting from the systemic injustices that have happened in the past, right? So I've done a lot of talking, but that's in a nutshell white privilege. So I need to stop talking. But ladies, the question I have for you is how has white privilege affected you? How has it impacted you in your communities? Where do you see it? Where does it pop up in your life? Let's just kind of do, that is a softball question, but I would love to hear your thoughts on what.
David, I have just a thing that I'd like to say, I guess, about you kind of listed all of these things that went into white supremacy and, like you said, white music or white culture and all of those things. And one of the insidious things, and I think things that we do to distance ourselves, is that we don't actually name what those things are. Like, there's not some genre called white music. There's a genre called white dancing, but that's not what we're talking about here. No, but I mean, you know, like white music, number one, is a number of things, right? But if we look at the way that classical music is privileged over jazz music, if we just want to be really specific about it, or the way that we consider white writers like Shakespeare to be canon as opposed to other writers, not other, but writers of color, and like those books, those plays, those poems, they don't get the same amount of playtime. We study those when it is Black History Month, or when it is Hispanic History Month, or when we're doing something that is special. So it's just like, I think it's really important to name those specific things that constitute what we might generally want to call white culture, that also pushes out things that people of other artists have, I mean, not other artists, but of other cultures have made. And instead of bringing them under this large tent of music or art or dance, it becomes, oh, well, that is African dance. Oh, well, that is Caribbean music, you know? And it takes on this, it sort of infuses the item with otherness, and infuses it with this idea that it might be a fun experience, but it's not, it's no Beethoven, you know, it's not it's not something that really in some ways we can deify, I would even say. So yes, just to point that out. And then
right before you get into your example, sorry, Tamekia, thanks so much for adding to or giving a better understanding of the definition we're talking about. I just wanted to quickly add something in there too, because I know sometimes I'll hear people talk about, well, I'm white and I have it hard. I am not privileged. I don't experience white privilege because my life is hard too. And just to kind of, the one thing I wanted to add to that is white privilege, anyone who uses that term is not saying that because you're white, your life is just great and you don't have problems or anything like that. It's more so saying everyone has it hard in a whole bunch of different types of ways, but none of the difficulties that you experience really have to do with the color of your skin. So if you think about, if everyone has it hard, Black people, white people, any other type of race, because life just throws curveballs at us, we sometimes make bad decisions that also cause us to suffer in different ways. But then on top of just the difficulty of life in general, then there's the burden of the difficulty of being a person of color that white people do not have to deal with. And so I just wanted to throw that in there, because we're not saying because you're white, you have a great life. It's just because you're white, you have the privilege that your life is not harder based on the color of your skin.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And I think one of the ways that I have seen white privilege show up. And it's actually, I guess, looking from a point of not having a privilege, it's been being in a lot of spaces and classes that have a lot of non-Black people, or like classes where I'm pretty much the only Black person. And the moment that something is considered to be a Black issue, or that there is like a topic that addresses like something about the Black experience, there is this desire to turn to the Black person in the class. And it's like, well, obviously you have a response, or you have something to say about this. And Jennifer, when you talked earlier about your hopes for the conversation and like acknowledging that all Black people aren't the same, I think that this is one of those things that really gets to that, where it is, it just becomes on you. Whereas if you're talking about a different subject, it's kind of shared by everyone to come up with the answers. It's shared by everyone to respond and to think deeply about it. But in those moments, I've definitely had times in classes where it was like, oh, well, you're the only one who can speak to this. And it's like, well, no, because this is a part of our history. It's not like I have some separate history apart from the U.S. history, or apart from this. Like I might have something to add to it, but also like let me add it. Don't put that pressure on me to be the one talking about it.
I
LaWanda,
definitely agree with everything that they have said. I would say, I would give an example of what Tamekia was talking about. When I went to university, I had a full scholarship to Northeast Christian University in Texas, and I wanted to go. The campus was beautiful, and it was really, they had the major and minor that I wanted and everything. And so, and I had, like I said, full scholarship, all room, board, books, everything covered. I go in with my mom for orientation, and you have to walk to the dean's office. We walk down this very long corridor, and they have the graduating class picture of every year since the school has been established down the hallway. And as we're walking, I'm noticing the photos begin in black and white, and they are obviously all white people. You keep going through the years, and they're just white people. They're just white people. The pictures turn to color, and they're just white people in color. And then around 1970 something, they got one Black person in the photo. And then they had two Black people, and I was like, oh, look at them, they're doing something. And we just kept walking down this hallway. It was very long, and they had a lot of pictures. But my mom and I were discussing the pictures and how the school had changed throughout the years, and we were like, oh, obviously they're more progressive now. We finally saw two Asians in one photo. We saw a Hispanic person in another photo. We got up to 3 Black people. And then we got to the end of the hallway, and I realized that the extent of their diversity, even though they claim to be a very diverse school, the extent of it was 3 Black people, 2 Asian people, and 3 Hispanic people. And I turned around, I turned to my mom, and I go, I can't go to this school. I cannot go to this school. And she's like, we're here, we've done everything. All you have to do is pick up your packet. And I said, I just can't be the Black person for all of these white people. I can't do it. It's too much pressure. It's too much time and effort. It's exhausting. I have to go to a different school. So we got in the car, drove home, and she put me in another university, which I had to work a job in order to help pay at that school, because yes, I did get scholarships, but that school was far more expensive than the one that I was going to. And because it was a last minute change, I didn't get a full scholarship to that school. So I had to get a job, and I had a car note, and I had to pay for my textbooks. And so my decision cost me time and money, but it was worth it. I still think it was worth it because I couldn't do that.
And I think we're often like faced with those choices of how do we protect ourselves, and how do we protect our peace, and just like in some ways it's almost like it's so good that you have the foresight to know that this is what it would be like for your 4 years there, because who knows what other uncomfortable situations or like downright belittling situations you might have found yourself in had you have gone to that school, you know? I mean, of course, there's always the possibility that, that wouldn't be the case, but come on, Northeast University.
I know where I was.
You just bringing up, LaWanda, you just bringing up university brought a thought to my mind, and just an example of white privilege is for a lot of people that get into prestigious universities, people of color, some of the backlash that they get from their own peers being the only reason you got into this school is because of affirmative action.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying like, you got into the school based off of your own merit and your intelligence and this, that, and the other. It's quite a large population of people really, because of thinking that Black people aren't as smart, or Black people don't this, or white people are the ones who are more superior intellectually and this, that, and the other, and are more deserving to get into these prestigious universities, people genuinely believing that you could not have gotten on in here based off of your merit. It had to have been just because you're Black, because affirmative action. No way you on your own could have done this. So that's one of the things that came into my mind. But then another thing, I think more personally for me, examples of privilege, and David, you talked a little bit about this when you talked about the superiority of white culture and things like that, is just, I think, we talked a little bit last week about censoring ourselves, having to censor myself and my expression of my Nigerian American culture for fear of not being accepted by the majority white culture, or being labeled a loud, angry Black woman or ghetto or something like that. So just a lot of self-censoring, that when I'm around people that look like me, or people that are people, they don't have to be Black, but maybe they're people of color in some other way, that I don't feel that I have to do that because I don't tend to have those same reactions, even when I'm acting naturally and comfortably. So there's that. And then even just having to think about how I'm dressing or how my family is dressing or something like that, having a half Black, half white son, and he's only about 3, but just as he gets older, just the thought of, you should be able to wear the same thing everyone else is wearing, but you might rub people the wrong way if you're wearing sweats or a hoodie or something like that. This person over here is free to dress that way because he's white, and people don't attach all of these negative, don't have all these negative assumptions about his character because he's white. Whereas for you, most of the time, even interracial children, if they are half Black or something like that, they will be considered Black, and then all of the things that we like to ascribe to the character of Black people get dropped on them, and then they have to think about, how am I speaking in front of people, how am I dressing in front of people, things that people of other races don't necessarily have to think so much about.
Yeah,
Definitely. So my daughter is 13, and last year she was 12, and we went on a mission trip to Kentucky. And before this, I think that I'm used to people thinking that she's older than what she is because she's tall. She is a tall person. Her father is very tall, and she's tall too. She's taller than I am, and I am short. And my entire life, I dealt with people thinking that I was younger than what I am, which, oh, what a problem. No plan. But I've always heard the notion that people thought that Black children are older than what they are, but I'd never had that ascribed to me because of my stature. And I don't know, people just tend to think that I look young. But the pastor of the church where we were staying, he put her in charge of the youth group. And she was very confused about why. And so she came to find me, and she was like, he told me to watch these children. And I approached him, and I'm like, why would you tell my my daughter to watch these children. He's like, oh, she's a leader on the team, right? And I'm like, no, she's 12. She doesn't look in any way older than the older white children who were there, because they all have older bodies, wearing makeup, doing older things, which she did not. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. So while she may be the same height as them, she had none of the characteristics that you would ascribe to older children. And she doesn't look like an adult. She still looks like a child. So that was very disconcerting to me, that he would think that she was an adult person. I still can't understand that. I still can't understand that. But I wanted to say that these examples of white privilege, they can be seen in these very large ways, but they can also be seen in just really tiny, minuscule things. And I think it's the tiny things that really chip away at you, because you kind of expect for people to turn to you if you're the only Black person in the room. Like, that has happened so many times. But something small that people don't think about are movies. Everyone goes to movies. We all enjoy movies. But I will say an example of this is the movie Frozen. And I'm going to say, for the record, I hate Frozen. I disliked the movie very much the first time I saw it, because I feel that it was poorly written and poorly scripted. And I don't think they did for a Disney movie, it did not give me what I was expecting out of a Disney movie. However, my children enjoyed it, and so I was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. We went and saw it. We spent money on it. I don't care. About 2 or 3 weeks after Frozen was released, the world exploded. Oh, it's the first feminist movie we've ever had. Oh, Elsa is so free. She didn't need a man to save her. Oh, and all the nonsense, all the drama about how Elsa was the first princess who ever did anything on her own, how she could stand on her own 2 feet. We won't even digress into how that doesn't even make sense or fit the storyline. What I will say is, no, a man did not save Elsa and Anna. That's true. But a man also didn't save Mulan. A man also didn't save Tiana. A man also didn't save Rapunzel, who was white, but not the correct whiteness. So she didn't count either. All of these movies where the woman was stronger than the man were made up for people, women, who were not stereotypical white women. And therefore, they were not the feminist role model, even though what they did was brave and inspiring and amazing. Even Pocahontas. I'm like, there's so many examples. And now having this discussion with a group of ladies about a group of mothers about how we loved all these other movies that we watched during our childhood, and we're sitting at a table and it's a very diverse group of women. In fact, there was only one white woman among us. And she said, I don't agree with you. I just don't agree with Tiana. You're wrong. She didn't do anything on her own. I hated that movie. What? I'm sorry. You could hate the movie, but what do you mean she didn't do anything on her own? Well, I just can't relate to her. What does that mean? That you can't relate to a hardworking woman who essentially freed herself from, she worked, she saved her money, she owned a business. What's not to like? The Princess and the Frog isn't one of my favorite movies because, it's Louisiana and I don't really care. But what's not to like about Tiana herself? Nothing. What's not to relate to? How could you relate to being a princess? You're a mother of 6. You don't work hard? I think you do. I am a mother of 3 and I work hard. You've never had to save money and scrimp and save. You're a military wife. I think you did. So what's different? Because Cinderella Yes, she worked hard, but she got wishes. Do you have a fairy godmother? That's how you related to her? No, that wasn't how? Okay. So when we get down to it, which I did ask these questions, she couldn't relate to her because she was Black. And I sat there speechless because how many times have I related to a white princess in a Disney movie?
And
Every
that
single time.
story. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but this is a conversation that I've had a billion times, just being in, not a billion times, but a lot of times being in the arts and just looking at like what stories are given a green light, because it's not just affecting how people experience the stories, but it also affects who gets their stories told. For years and years and years, Hollywood said, well, we can't produce a Black movie because, or a movie with a Black lead or whatever it is, because um, people will not support the film. It won't have the appeal as these other things. And so projects were passed up, which is what was so important about Black Panther, the support that it got. A number of things are really important about Black Panther. The fact that it didn't focus on like a slave victim narrative, but it really celebrated some powerful things about looking at Black bodies as scientists, looking at them as humanists, looking at humanitarians. Looking at them as as brave warriors, you know, looking at them as good financial stewards. All of these things that we come to we come to see as, oh, these are admirable qualities that poor, lazy Black people, whether you're talking about Black people in this country or you're talking about Black Africans, when we think about like looking at God, it just turned my stomach, the sort of words that were used when we were talking about immigration and prioritizing immigration from Northern European countries, but you know, banning people from darker skinned countries. Like, just being honest, you know, that's what it was.
S-hole countries, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so I think Black Panther was so important because it was a blockbuster film, and it showed Black people in all of these wonderful, beautiful roles, not where they were suffering. And it said, yes, you can make money from this, which it's sad that you have to put things in those terms. But as far as like representation goes and showing that these stories have value, it was really important.
So
I think a couple of
no, go for it, Jared.
a couple of ways that white privilege. I love what you're saying, LaWanda, about just sometimes it's in the small things. So example being, my husband is white, and we were thinking about where to live. Like, should we stay where we are in Howard County, or should we go elsewhere, or even just around the country? And the thing that just hurt my heart so much is I have to do a lot of research to see, like, how will people feel about our relationship? Not because of my husband, but because of me and his children. I had to have a conversation with him when he expressed interest in wanting to get married, that your life will be easier for all these different reasons if you don't marry me because I'm Black. If you choose to marry a white woman, your life will be easier. So you need to understand that, and you need to understand what you are kind of getting yourself into. So kind of back to the housing thing, I wish that I didn't have to worry about, if I were to move into a white middle class neighborhood or something like that, that I would not have to worry about being fully accepted. But that is something that I do have to worry about, because even if the people are not part of the KKK, this, that, and the other, just wanting to protect myself and to protect my children from all of the things that will be said that could be called microaggressions, even from people that I believe could genuinely care about me, but it's just, do I want to live with that for an extended period of time? Do I want to invite my children into that kind of environment where even if it's just one person on the block feels some type of way about the way our skin color, we live with them and regularly have to interact with that. Whereas if I were a white woman and had a white husband, you just don't have to deal with it as much. So I've had friends that are like, oh, this is a great area you should look into. We look at it and it is like 99% white. And my friends are white and they're so well-meaning and I know that they love me, but I'm like, I'll turn over to Josh and be like, they don't understand, it's like they don't understand and they love me and I understand that, but they don't have to think about the fact that, oh, am I going to be welcome here because of my skin? Because they know that they're going to be welcome there. Whereas me, that's not the case so many times. So that's one thing with housing. And then the other thing with health, actually. So a lot of times when you look at a medical textbook, the pictures that you will see are of other white people. Could it be because it's written by mostly white people? I don't know if that could be the case. The issue with that is that at least when we're looking at the like dermatology or something, skin conditions can look different on different colored skin. So the issue there is that when you are having how you're being taught, okay, this is this, this is this, when you see something like this, raised red bumps that look like this, or yellow or purple or whatever it might be, that's how you're taught to identify and diagnose different conditions. Well, when I have something that is the same exact condition, but it doesn't appear this way on my dark skin, you're going to have more trouble diagnosing me correctly. And so that's just one example. Now, thank God, in the recent past, there have been people that are like, okay, let's kind of help with this. And there's some websites and things now that show different skin conditions specifically on darker skin people so that it's easier to correctly identify different skin issues. But that's just an example of how when we think about things from the perspective of whiteness, you're not doing it on purpose, sometimes it is, but I'm sure in the health case, it's not done on purpose, but it's still done. And then it disadvantages people of color that just have darker skin and their conditions might present themselves differently than on lighter skin.
It's done without the consideration,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
and that's a part of the problem of saying I don't see color or I don't see race, because instead of that being an equal ground, it then disadvantages me further because now you're not taking into consideration what actually might be biologically different for me based on the diet of where my people have come from, based on the conditions that they may have adapted to, all of these things. And that's also true for just like studies for medicines or treatments for particular conditions that in the past they just have not really included. Really, they've been white men for the most part, as our society is set up for white men, right? But that means like not only have you not studied the female body, but you definitely haven't studied the Black female body. And so to know whether or not this medicine would actually work for me, you don't have that information. You don't have the information on what adverse conditions a Black woman might be more susceptible to.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is like white privilege is in everything, right? I mean, or most things.
The things we consider normal.
Yeah, I mean, it's in our Disney movies, right?
It's so true. Just a quick thing about the Disney movies, just going back to movies and the way that white supremacy shows up in that is just like the ownership of characters and the ownership of worlds, just like sci-fi and how in a lot of like fantasy more so than sci-fi, there's this idea that like there's no one there except for white people. Post-apocalyptic things, no one there except for white people. It's like, what's going on with that? Where did everybody else go? And then the thing that just broke my heart to think of, the ownership of characters, looking at a lot of people were really upset when Hunger Games came out, and Rue, who is she in the book, she is described as a Black character or a character of darker skin with curly hair, which is a Black character. And they were upset that was it, I can't remember her name,
That
but
super cute, pretty
she's
little
so
black
cute.
girl. She's so
Amanda
precious.
something, but that she was put into the role. And then even more recently than that, last year, they were really, really upset that they decided to cast a black girl as Ariel, because we all know that only white people are mermaids.
Yeah, I just learned that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we need to defund Disney. That
We do need to defund Disney because they're charging $30 for Mulan.
Yes, for the live action Mulan movie. I'm very upset about that. I'm not going to watch it. I'm boycotting the Mulan movie, and I love Mulan.
yeah. Oh, and okay, yeah. Oh, there's so many tangents we could go down. I do feel like every generation, like there's always some gripe for Disney, right? Like there's always some reason for why this generation, is not going to watch Disney, but we'll still go to Disney World. Well, maybe not.
I'm still watching Disney, David.
Okay.
I love all the Disney old movies. I just hate Frozen.
Yeah. Well, let it go, LaWanda. Let it go. So
that song is a very deceptive song. I will
That's
not.
also a part of why, man, when she gets a hold of her powers, something happens to her.
Okay. Okay, so white privilege, right? So it's in our art, it's in academia, it's in our healthcare. Gosh, I think we listed other categories. One we didn't really highlight, but I don't think we have time. Just power, right? Just like power dynamics. I'm sure we could go a deep dive on that, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty prevalent, right? Is white privilege. And that's an effect of white supremacy, or, if you don't like that term, maybe white is right? Or just lifting our own white culture above others, or maybe it's not, we don't think we're lifting our culture above others, but we're definitely saying there's other cultures that don't matter, right? Or who cares, right? It's really a failure of joining, of, I don't know, maybe creating a truly hospitable nation, right? In a sense, that could be one way of looking at it. But so that's white privilege is an effect of, or is a result of white supremacy. But I wanted to shift gears to this idea of colorism, because I think white supremacy also, I don't think it started colorism, and I think Jennifer is going to talk a little bit about that, but it's definitely, white supremacy has definitely influenced colorism here in America. And when we talk about colorism, you're like, well, what is that? Like, what is that? How is that different than racism? Let me read to you kind of the definition that we're going to use for this conversation. Colorism, a term believed to be first coined by in 1982 by Pulitzer Prize winner Alice Walker, was defined by her to mean the prejudicial or preferential treatment of same-race people based solely on their color. Colorism stems from racism and is an indirect tool used to carry out racism. So I'll give it just a quick example, personal example, and then the ladies can kind of dive deep. My wife is Indian. She's a brown-skinned American. We went to the Bahamas, not the Bahamas, I think we went to Mexico, and we were out in the sun for 3 days. And Sarah went to Mexico, more lighter skin, so to speak. And then when we got back from Mexico, she was golden brown. And then one of the first things that we did was we visited her parents, and they saw how dark she got, and they wanted to slap her. It kind of like a metaphorical slap, like, what are you doing, right? Like, how dare you get this dark? You are shaming, you're shaming our family, yourself, etc. Right? So that's kind of that idea of colorism. And so, ladies, how have you seen colorism expressed? Sorry, my wife just texted me. She's listening. She said it wasn't her parents, it was her grandparents. So I messed up. I love you, my mother-in-law, father-in-law. You did not do that. But I wanted to ask the question, how have you seen colorism expressed in your life, in your community, in your experiences? and maybe even how have you even seen it tied or related to even white supremacy? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So just to begin with, real quick, when we talk about colorism, we are not saying that it's not okay to have preferences, and so that you must be attracted to all people equally, whatever. That's not what we're saying. The issue with colorism is when your preferences, or just people's preferences in general, then elevate some and devalue others, which then disadvantages those who are not preferred. So I just wanted to make that distinction real quick, because it's, oh, are you telling me I have to be attracted to this? That's not what we're saying. We're saying that every person, no matter what their hue is, ought to be treated exactly the same, valued exactly the same. So I just wanted to make that distinction really quickly. I guess to add to that, some of the like colorism, and I'm really thankful that you use the example of your wife being Indian, to say that colorism is something that is just kind of like a worldwide thing. I think in our country, it was really bolstered by our history of slavery. We can't say that slavery is what started colorism in this country, because if you look at places that were not colonized and did not have slaves from Africa shipped there you can still find examples of colors, like ancient colorism and things like that. But I think part of where it comes from is this outside of race, when we equate lightness with goodness and purity, and then darkness is associated with evil and mystery and just some more negative things, that we then take that and then ascribe that to people and say, okay, the lighter people are, the better they are, the more pure or good or capable or whatever it might be. We make assumptions about people based on their hue. So the issue with this, again, is that when we make assumptions based off of, okay, you're lighter skinned, you're darker skinned, whatever it is, then we say you're probably more intelligent because you're lighter skinned. You probably have more moral worth. You have a kinder or more tempered temperament, whatever it is, based off of this person's hue. And then that influences things. Even studies have shown that our colorism can even influence our hiring practices. And so that's just an example of how colorism, it's not just about, oh, I think this person is more attractive than this person, but how it's super insidious and then can then systematically disadvantage certain peoples because of the shade of their skin. So I'll let the other ladies share, and then I'll share some examples as well, but I've just said a lot.
LaWanda or Tamekia, you need to speak, okay? I don't know how to like transition into one of y'all, but you just need to say something about colorism, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Jennifer, yes, you were just talking about how it's a system that goes beyond our country and beyond our history. Although I think in this country, we have really, well, I can't say that just we have taken it to far measures, because it is true, it's prevalent in a lot of societies. But it's something that you saw during like slavery times, where you saw the darker people out in the field, and then you saw like lighter people in the house, or doing like the lighter work, that sort of thing, that I think has really continued throughout and carried throughout, because at some point it's like, oh, well, if I'm light enough, I can pass as white. And just that idea of being able to escape kind of what society says that you're destined to be, which in and of itself sort of disproves so many of the ideas that are entrenched within this like idea of colorism. And just like you said, it's still there today, whether it be hiring practices, or it be the way that we pay people, or the way that we see how something that we receive, how something is presented. I think that's one of the most interesting things to me, is that depending on who is presenting an idea or who is presenting a specific features, those features can be acceptable or they cannot be acceptable. I saw, this happened a lot in the Motown era, or around like the Motown era. Maybe it was before the Motown era. I think it was like when rock and roll was first getting started, where you had a lot of Black musicians who were doing all sorts of creative and interesting things with music, but their music was actually being stolen and repackaged and presented by white artists. And when they were repackaged and presented by white artists, they became extremely popular. And so it wasn't so much what was happening as it was about who was presenting it. And that, I think, really set us up for a large part of the society that we have today, and like the inequality of the society that we have today, where you see those ideas and you see these sort of innovations not being valued because they were being presented by a person of darker skin, but being valued or being used when they were presented by a person of lighter skin or a white person.
Tamekia, wasn't that like an example? Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert on this, but like Elvis, right? So Elvis took a lot of his moves or his style from the Black community.
Yes, there's a particular artist that he imitated that I can't remember who it is. But yeah, he is one of those people, and it's actually really cool because if you go to the Rock and Roll History Museum, I'm trying to think of what it's called, but it's in Cleveland. They actually do a fairly good job of establishing like the blues movement and looking at all of these Black artists, and it's sort of fascinating actually, because you see all of these steps towards rock and roll and you see all of these Black artists, and then it just like shifts, and there are a ton of white artists that have taken over what we call rock and roll, and you know that so many of those Black artists are like people you've never heard of, and or if you've heard of them, you also recognize that like their career was largely uncelebrated as opposed to the white artists that came after them.
Now, I would say, or I would add to this conversation that colorism is also internalized by ethnic cultures, and so you get a lot of power struggles within the Black community, within the Indian community, within the Asian community. You get these, even the Hispanic and Latin American communities, you get these power struggles or these power dynamics where the culture is then telling you that you are worth less if your skin is dark. Not just the majority culture of white people, but your own culture is either telling you one of two things. They can be telling you that you're too dark, you are ugly, you are not accepted, you are not beautiful. Or they could be telling you, oh, you're so light skinned, I hate you. So normally those are the darker skinned people that are hating the lighter skinned people because of the advantages that they're given because of their lighter skin. But the people in the middle, all the middle ground colored skinned toned people, hate the darker skinned people because they're not as light as the lighter brown people or less melanated people. And so it's a very, for lack of a better term, crab in a barrel society where everyone is getting pulled down, clawed on, and just is destructive to your self-esteem, your self-worth, to knowing who you are, to knowing where you stand, to being accepted. I know many interracial children who suffered from this, which is how you got the interracial or mixed movement that we see now, saying that, you know, we're making things for our hair, we're making things for our skin, we're speaking out about our lives. But you get that now because of the fact that they were hated on so much by their own community of Black people. They're so completely unaccepted by white people, but then the Black people also didn't like them or didn't accept them or didn't want to have anything to do with them because they felt like their lighter skin gave them unfair advantages, which it did. It gave them more advantages than it gave to a darker skinned, tightly coiled haired person. But again, I don't think you should be placing value on anyone according to their skin type or their hair color or their hair texture. But you do see these things play out in our society, and not like everyone has said, not just our society. This is something that is systemic in lots of ethnic societies around the world.
Jennifer, this is an issue that I know like really hits home with you. And maybe a month ago when I was preaching, I think I brought up the Straight Outta Compton casting call, right? And if you're not familiar with that, it was like it graded women from A to D, right? And A was basically like, well, B, I'll just start with B. B was Beyonce. So A was basically like, the description was like, it clearly described like a white woman, a really white, skinny woman in her 20s, right? B is Beyonce, and then D on the bottom is like poor Black women, right? And like that's kind of like literally, just Google it. And I share that with the church, and then I just asked Jennifer's feedback like the next day, and it was like we just had an incredible conversation. And I just learned so much. But Jennifer, I wanted to kind of, this is personal for you. I know it's been a challenge for you, and I'd love for you just to kind of share with us, you know, where have you seen colorism impact your life? How has it been expressed? How have maybe you've overcome it, or just your process in that?
Yeah, sure. So really quickly to clarify, because I think you said D was poor Black women. It wasn't just poor Black women, it was dark-skinned women. And that was the like kind of, if we want to use the word trigger or whatever. And I was telling David, I'm like, I'm not generally triggered by many things. But that just brought me back to it was not a blast to the past. It was a horror movie to the past. So basically, you can see I am not a light-skinned woman. And growing up at a very young age, without anyone needing to tell me, I could see that culture does not value dark-skinned women. It doesn't value dark-skinned girls, whatever it is, that just always being like, kind of like Sarah's experience. You don't want to be in the sun too much because then you're going to get extra Black, you know, just comments that continually beat down how God made you in specific. So just over and over and over hearing that. And then me being Nigerian American, and knowing that a very large, I think it was maybe 60+% of women in Nigeria bleach their skin with different skin bleaching lotions and things like that, because also having internalized the whiter your skin is, the lighter it is, the better you are as a person, the more valued you are as a person. So many people that I knew, just being Nigerian, I know so many people are practicing this. And then even just struggling with so much jealousy of my lighter skinned cousins or friends or whatever it was, because the world told me, little Black girl, you're ugly, you're not valuable, you are all of the things that was exactly the opposite of what God had to say about me. But I didn't know that. I mean, I grew up in church, but let's just say the world's voice is a lot louder than God's voice for me. And so basically, with that, growing up with so much insecurity because of the fact that my darker skin was so devalued. Even the music I was listening to, we would talk about red bone girls or yellow bone girls, whatever it was, meaning light skinned girls. So in every way on TV, like there weren't a lot of Black people to begin with that I'm seeing on TV. And if they are, the ones that are like cleaned up or attractive or sexy or whatever it was are lighter skinned Black women. And then maybe I can think of like some examples of darker skinned people, but they'd be looking crazy, like a hot mess, like on drugs or whatever it was, but just represented in such a terrible light, and them being darker skinned people. And so with that, a journey, me and then many other of the darker skinned girls that I knew, at least in college, realizing, okay, we're not valued by people, so we are going to do everything we can to find our value in every and anything else, and not including the Lord. And so then, because of having such a low self-esteem from growing up from a life of people telling you you have no worth because you're the color of the shade, not just the color, but the shade of your skin, on top of just being Black and the way people feel about you for being Black. Now you're dark and Black. Just making lots and lots of poor choices and allowing a lot of evil to be done to me, thinking that, oh, okay, I can let this person do this to me because in some way it means that I'm worth more or something like that. But just so many examples I can name, person after person after person after person who is darker skinned that has suffered so deeply internally and were pushed and tempted to find their worth in everything but God by a world who told them that they were almost worth nothing because of the shade of their skin. So that was basically my growing up experience. And just to talk about like what God did with that as I started to explore like just a true self-hatred. I can't even tell you the number of times I wished I was either white or light skinned growing up. The number of times I wished to be something other than who God created me as, because what everyone else was telling me about myself. But as I went on a journey of coming to understand who Jesus was truly, not just with my head knowledge, but with my heart, he brought me to a place of, I think I would tell people like, oh, about my experience, and like, oh no, you're so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And that was not actually helpful to me, because what I needed was not people's external valuing of who I was as a person. I didn't need you to think I was beautiful anymore, because I realized, this is what Jesus says about me. And if I believe Jesus is who he says he is, you thinking I'm pretty or not pretty really doesn't matter at all. And so getting to a place, and it's funny because even now, I think just 2 weeks ago, I was sharing this with like some dear women in my Bible study group, another one who happened to almost all be white. And that's their first, oh, no, you're beautiful, this, that, and the other, your skin is beautiful. It was like, that's not actually what God used to help me to see myself as he sees me. It was just that he values me just as much as he values the people that the world says are the greatest and the best, that I am on the same just field as them, so that whatever you think about me personally, about my body type, about the shade of my skin, about the coily kinkiness of my hair, matters not at all because of who Jesus says I am. So that's a little bit about my experience. One phrase that I have to tell people, stop telling dark skin or Black people at all, is you're pretty for a Black girl. Like, that is such a twisted, evil, backhanded compliment, because again, it's just perpetuating that whiteness is right, white as the standard of goodness, Black as the standard of poor, ugly, this, that, and the other. And so it's like, oh, wow. It's basically like saying, Black people are ugly. I'm shocked that there's something even remotely attractive about you because Black people are ugly. So, but I've just heard that so many times, and there was a point where I started to think, oh, that's a really nice compliment. And then I was like, for a Black girl, what are you even saying right now? So just had to throw that one in there too, please. Just if that's a thing that you have said or heard say, here's a way that you can fight against colorism, is to correct yourself if you've said that to somebody, to correct your friends when they're tempted to say that, or when they do say that, like, what do you mean for a Black girl, or for this girl, or for that, whatever it is. But I'm gonna stop talking now.
I think Jennifer, like when you share that, what's crazy is you just see like how deep this stuff goes, right? And like theologically, we always, as a pastor, we always say like, okay, we're more sinful than what we want to believe. and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. But then like if you actually start digging, you see how sin or warped theologies just, right, yeah, like just little comments like you're pretty for a Black girl. It's like just how messed up a comment like that is, and the power that has over an individual. Thank you for sharing that. Ladies, anything else you want to chime in on colorism? Have you seen it expressed?
Just to throw this into things that you should not say.
Okay, yeah.
You're very articulate for a Black person, which is something that I've been told way more times than I care for. You also shouldn't say it for Southerners or Texans. That is its own form of bias, which is actually really interesting. But you know, it has that same effect, and it really is a similar thing. It shows that like colorism is not just something that has to do solely with the color of your skin, but it really is this privileging of things that are associated with one race or this one standard of living as being right, and the just devaluing of anything that is not that, you know, and within the world of that, there are all sorts of ways, like LaWanda was talking about earlier, of getting caught in the middle, and really looking at the ways that tears, you know, that tears at who God created you to be. And it's one of the things that has really been fascinating to me, are churches and pastors who are really pushing back on the idea of social justice, or on the idea of speaking up for people who are historically oppressed, or who have you know, are, it's like you're building and just saying, oh well, you know, God hasn't called us to speak into that, or God hasn't called us to be a part of that healing. But what is the church if it's not there to share in someone's pain, and to stand with them through periods of healing, and to not add to the trauma that has already been done? Because that's the other thing. If we choose not to investigate our bias, even me, you know, not, I mean, me included, I should say, you know, if I choose not to investigate my bias, that definitely sets me up to hurt someone else, or to speak hurtful words to someone else. So it's just like, we both as a church and as individuals and light bearers, that is a part of bearing that light, is allowing it to look into us and to see, what ways am I attributing to this? What ways am I benefiting from this? And then how can I actually and actively turn away from that? Because it is this privileging, it is pride, you know, and it's pride on the one hand, and then it's violence on the other hand. And for so many people who have bleached their skin, people who have totally turned their back on who they sort of their, I guess, historical background, people who have like done everything under the sun to their hair except for let it grow, that turns into violence against yourself, and this sort of self-loathing and self-hate, that it's really hard for me to say that, yeah, that's the thing that God wants for us to allow.
So I wanted to say that I think my mom was really a genius, or that God, you know, really shined a light in her area of expertise, meaning raising me, because I am an extremely dark-skinned Black woman, but every day we get up in the morning and my mom would have us, so we woke up super early so we could go to a different school. So we would probably get in the car at like 6 a.m. and we would have been up since 4:30.
Early enough to watch Bananas in Pajamas.
Yes, Bananas in Pajamas and Sailor Moon. Anyway, we would get in the car and she would pray over us, and she, you know, she would anoint us and things, but we get in the car and she would make us do these confessions. And every day we would say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Like, God has knitted me together in the womb. Like, he knew me. He knows every hair on my head. God believes that I am beautiful. And saying those things daily, sometimes it felt rote. Sometimes it felt, let me say it as fast as I can. But what it did was provide this armor on me that was just so strong against the push of the world. And so, yes, my cousin called me tar baby, and I said, I'm a gorgeous tar baby. And so kids at school, you know, it's they want to say, let's pick on this child, or let's do this, but I had this armor of God on me. And she would also have us put on the whole armor of God in the car as well, every day. And so, but I really had, like, it just, I believe that is so true, that I had an armor on, even though I'm, you know, today I can feel like sometimes I'm just saying the scriptures, I'm just saying words, and that there's no power in them. I can look back and go, no, there is power in them, because every day I got up and I went out into the world stronger than all those other people, able to take those fiery darts and not have it pierce my soul, able to walk through the fire and not be burned, able to, there's so many African American people who have been hurt so desperately by society, by white people, by Black people, by all people, that they hate people. They hate white people, they hate Black people, they hate themselves, they hate everybody. And I'm not that person, and I thank God for that, because he is the reason. He is the only reason that I'm not that way, that I don't have to get up every morning trying to go out and fight those fights in my own strength, that I can just put on the whole armor of God and walk in his peace every day. That's really important to say, because God is a refuge. He is a hiding place. He is a shelter. He is a comforter. He is a father. He is a friend. He is everything. And he will be all those things to you and more. And if God says you are worthy, who cares what anyone else says? It doesn't matter.
And I love that, because just especially as you were listing out, like, they hate themselves, they hate everybody else, basically. Just, we see the spiritual damage that colorism and the white is right ideology does to people. So there's the spiritual level, there's a financial level as well, where, and maybe you wouldn't necessarily call this colorism, but it goes more so, I guess, with under the white is right umbrella when it comes to hair, and just kinky coily hair being at the very, very bottom, and then straight hair being what is praised and most beautiful. And so I just, the amount of money that people in the African American community spend on making their hair look as white as possible is painful. So we see that there's a spiritual aspect, there's a financial aspect, as we try to whiten ourselves so that we can be come up to the standard of beauty that the rest of the world is trying to put on us. There's also with makeup as well. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, maybe not men, but the idea of contouring. So I think about contouring, people contouring their noses, where you put makeup on in a certain way to make it look like you have more of a bridge or something to your nose. Yes, more white, more European.
Yeah.
That is not the way that God has made my nose. And so when we do that, we're literally saying, what God has given me is not enough. Let me change it. Even though I'm not surgically changing it, I'm using makeup to change it so that my nose looks whiter ultimately. And I'm not condemning people that are doing this at all. I'm just saying that it goes to that, oh, more European looks are what is more beautiful, is more prized, more valued. So let me do what I have to do to get there. And that has a huge financial burden as well, especially in the Black community, with that as well. And then there is, like, also, if we look at fashion, just because I want to, like, I feel like some people might hear this and say, oh, these are just personal experiences. Like, it's not really systematic, or it's not this, it's not that and the other. Okay, your feelings were hurt, but it's so much deeper than that. It is spiritual, it is financial. Some more personal examples, even just clothing sizes. So I don't know about you, Tamekia and LaWanda, but it was so hard to find clothing that fit a body shape that was not what my skinny white friends were.
Have you ever tried to buy pants from Aerie? It does not work.
I will say my daughter wants to wear the leggings and a long t-shirt, and I'm like, no, you have a butt, my dear. I'm so sorry. It's just not. It is made for little white girls, and you have.
That's
I can't
not your
deal with
body.
any of that. You have to wear clothes.
But yeah, so even just, I think, Tamekia, you were saying something. Oh, Black people not being considered. And so people like body shapes that more Black people than white people, or more people of color, I'll say, tend to have than white people tend to have. Oh, this line and this line and this line are not even going to consider making clothes that would fit these types of body structures. And that's something that I and a lot of people that are built like me experience growing up as well. Just again, devaluing, where it's like, I have to go specifically to like Black brands to get, at least growing up, I had to go to Black brands to get clothes that actually fit my body. Or I would go to the store and not find hardly any products that I could use for my hair, because all of the products that were even like, not just for hair, but lotions and soaps, like would not do well on my skin. And so I specifically, okay, who makes products specifically for Black people? And there's a little tiny section of like 4 different brands for people that are like me, where the entire rest of the aisle is more so for white or whiter people. So yeah, just so many different levels.
While we're talking about the industry of beauty and health and hair, or just hair and skin, I would also just like to point out that under the white is white umbrella, that you have white people then go and adapt these characteristics that they see Black people having, whether it's getting lip injections or getting butt implants, or getting widening their hips, which is a surgery, and then they are praised for those things. They are then upheld and said, oh, what a gorgeous white woman this is, because she made herself look more Black.
What maybe
they'll just say, oh, she has a beautiful this, that, and the other, but those same features on a Black woman are never praised, while they are highly praised with the augmentation of a white person's body, or their skin color, or their hair. They go get cornrows, and it's oh my gosh, you got your hair braided. My hair is braided all the time because I'm lazy, not because I'm Black. I don't like combing my hair, guys. But I'm just like, really? Cornrows? They don't, guys, it's okay to like them, like it's great, but don't act like you invented cornrows and then you call them something else. Oh, I'm going to go get these interlocking braids. Okay, they're cornrows, guys. They have been for centuries. Or I'm going to go and buy this hair bonnet for $50. They sell those at Walmart for $5. They have been for centuries because they were invented by Black people. And you don't see it, or you don't market it, or you think it's something new, and then so many people are willing to pay tons of money for it because it is a white person who is marketing it, or it's a white person who has sanctioned it, and the whole time it's been in Black culture. So I just wanted to point that out.
Hey, we're coming. We're gonna go over. We need to wrap this up. Man, everything that's been said has been really good. I kind of wanted to go back to what LaWanda shared a few minutes ago, and kind of end on that note. Is in a world where there's white privilege, so you're living in a community, a culture, a country. It's not made for you, right? And you see the privileges of someone like me who it's been made for. You're living in that type of world every day. Plus, then there's the colorism dynamics where, you're told from the outside and from the inside that you're not beautiful, that you're not good enough. How does your faith in Jesus Christ, give you strength, endure this, or give you healing, right, in the midst of the sickness, of this poison that's in the air that we breathe, that's in the water that we drink? How has your faith helped you survive and thrive in this type of context?
So I talked a bit last week and a bit earlier about just how no one else died for my sins. No one else reconciles me to God. So anyone else's opinion of me is eternally insignificant. But another verse that just means a lot to me is 1 Peter 3, verses 3-4. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So basically for me, it's just that reminder from God that I don't need to live by the world's standard of beauty, that I'm freed from that sort of bondage, which keeps me chained at the bottom. That is a financial bondage, that is an emotional and a mental bondage, and is even a deep, deep-seated spiritual bondage that tells me to look for my satisfaction and worth in anything other than God. That the gospel of Christ frees me from that. So I'd say that is how I'm liberated from all of that.
I would say I don't stay there. Most of my time is spent raising my children, enjoying my friends and my family, and living the life that God has provided for me, which I am so thankful for, and I am very blessed. Knowing who I am in Christ is everything. That's everything.
And I'm going to agree with LaWanda and Jennifer, but also share when I was in high school, and this was right before I was going to college, the church that we went through a lot of changes, like major changes. And I remember feeling very disconcerted by a lot of the changes that were happening there. And I felt like they didn't stick with the values that they had when I was grade. We went to the same church from when I was in third grade, I think, through high school. And I remember the teaching changed, the sermons changed, the things that we talked about that were really crucial to my understanding of the Bible and God and all of these things. They just kind of disappeared. People who I knew had been very faithful to the church seemed to be just like overlooked and turned out, and it was just bizarre to me. But I distinctly remember at some point just feeling really low about this church and kind of about my faith, and being like, well, I don't know, if these things can change this easily, then, maybe it's not really about God, or maybe God isn't really who I thought that God was, or something like that. And I remember God asking me, like, is your faith in me, or is your faith in a church? And I took a moment, but my response was like, oh, no, my faith is definitely in God. And that to me has kind of restructured everything. And it makes it so that, like, no matter what the world or another person or an experience that I have, I know that that is not from God, and that is not of God. Like, that's not who God is. And so my faith and, like, all of the promises that God has given me in his words, those things stand. the identity that I have from God, that is what stands. The fact that Jesus came and died for my sins and was, died a horrific death so that I could be in relationship with God the Father, that still stands. And that not only encourages me about who I am, but it also encourages me about reaching out to other people, about speaking out against injustice when I see it and where I see it, and about taking actions towards creating a world that looks more like God's kingdom on this earth.
Amen. It's interesting as we conclude, for all the really the injustices that Black women have faced. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but historically, it's really Christ who's really, like at LaWanda, like just the story that you shared about your mom, right? Like it was faith that just anchored, these women, these godly women, this community to not just endure, but still thrive in the midst of like persecution, to bring about justice, right? Even the civil rights era, right? And the power of the gospel has always been at work amongst Black women. And I think sometimes maybe in our community, I wonder if we're kind of like forgetting that, right? We're forgetting that powerful aspect.
Last week I mentioned the story of Hagar, and Hagar was not a power, but from the world's eyes, she was not a powerful woman. From the world's eyes, she could have like gone out into the desert and her son could have died. She didn't have any resources. She did not have money. She didn't have servants. She didn't even have the basic necessities that she needed to live. But in all of that, God was the one who saw her. And I think that's why I love that story so much. And I think that it is that same sort of thing where it is this place where like I literally cannot do it, I can't, whether it is feed my children or I can't support my family, like all I can do is to cry out and to turn to God. I think that is a place that Black women have often historically come from. And for all of the like research about, or not research, theories about like when you become more educated, or religion is for the poor, religion is for people who don't have things, the love and like relationship that you have with God, I think you don't experience it any more than you do when you are in that position of desperation. And that's one of the things that we forget, is that when we get our education, get our high paying job, have all of our needs met, we can go and solve our problems with of sickness or whatever it is, all of our external needs are met. And sometimes that can actually cut us off from knowing and experiencing that deep relationship with God, because we don't have that desire and need for Him. I think I have experienced that in just feeling like I can do this in my own strength. And I think that is why Black women have often or historically had such a strong connection with God, is because who else were they going to turn to, but God saw.
Yeah.
God was there.
Yeah.
God provided in so many ways. God provided. I think LaWanda and I could talk a lot about different times when things didn't seem like they were going to work out, but they did. And whether you want to see that as the provision of God, or if you want to see that as, oh, everything's works out, that depends on your perspective. But our perspective starts in the relationship that we have with God.
Yeah. Blessed are the poor, or blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. And to segue, to transition to next week, is even though we see this huge, strong faith in the relationship with God, they've endured that even in the midst of racism within the church. And so next week, we're going to be talking about the role of faith with Black women, but then how Black women have experienced racism within the church, right? And so that will be that's going to be a doozy, and I'm really excited as we explore that aspect with these ladies. And so, but Jennifer, Tamekia, LaWanda, thank you as always. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for having the courage to say hard things. And thank you for being faithful to God in this. And you've blessed me. You've blessed the 8 people watching this, and whoever else is gonna watch this online as well. But we love y'all, and y'all are great. Let me just close in prayer, and then audience, if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, message me privately on Zoom, or you can also email me. But let me close in prayer real quick. God, thank you for today. Thank you for these women. Thank you for how you've gifted them, how you given them a voice. God, thank you for how they're teaching us, how they're leading us, how they're definitely me, God, opening my eyes to things that I haven't seen, that I haven't been aware of, opening my eyes to even just my own personal prejudice. And so thank you for them, Lord. Would you continue to use them? Would you continue to bless them? Keep them, God, provide for them, bless their families. And ultimately, God, I pray that you could use this conversation to draw us closer to yourself, to help us to know, to taste and see the goodness of Jesus Christ. And so we give you this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. We'll be back next Sunday, 6:30 to 8-ish, as we talk about racism in the church. So God bless y'all, and we'll see you next week.